So now let me introduce André Rakoto. André Rakoto, PhD, is the director for the Paris area of the French Combat Veterans and War Victim Office, ONAC-VG. In 2018, he was involved, among other things, in the organization of the exhibition Black Soldiers, French and American Troops in the Two World Wars, created by the ACHAC group with the support of the ONAC-VG. The launch of this exhibition was accompanied by a 2-year cycle of conferences and debates in partnership with the US Embassy and the Parisian Education Authority. In 2020, he also participated in the design of the Tirailleurs d'Afrique exhibition, again with ACHAC and the ONAC-VG. He is also an associate member of the LARCA laboratory at the University of Paris-Cité. His work focuses on the comparative history of troops of African origin in France and the United States. Today, he will be talking about the contribution of Africans and Caribbeans in the two world wars and the appreciation of that contribution. So I will now hand over to André. Thank you.
It's better with a working mic. Well, thank you very much for your kind words, Coralie, and thank you, Barbara, for introducing the workshop. It's a great pleasure, an honor to be with you today. I will talk, freely about different aspects of the contribution of what we call in France colonial troops, and also troops from the Caribbeans. And how we deal with the memory today. How remembrance is a key element of the work of the office I'm the director for in Paris. Let me give you just a few details about the work we do, so that you understand then how I am positioned in a particular perspective. The ONAC-VG, French acronym for Combat Veterans and War Victims Office, was first created in 1916 because of the tremendous number of casualties in World War I, and we had a lot of soldiers who were coming back from the battlefield wounded, and they had to be retrained to be able to live and sustain themselves in spite of their wounds. And the first commission was created, the first office was created to support them. And then there was a second office created to support the orphans and the families. And then a third office was created later on to support veterans, combat veterans as a whole body. So what do we do today? Because very often when we talk about the missions of the office today in France, people will think that we are not living in a present time, because they think that war is over. Well, we do have people deployed overseas. We do unfortunately lose soldiers in the foreign battlefields even today. In 2020, we buried a French soldier, a 20-year-old, who died in Mali. So we are still engaged in operations, and it's very important for an office like ours to be known to the public, because not only do we support those who are today the combatants of our forces, in our forces, but also we protect the memory of those who came before them. This is why I'm here today to discuss that. Actually, the work of the office is divided in three main activities. The first activity is mainly administrative. We recognize those who are combat veterans, who war victims, by awarding them specific titles, which take us to the second mission of the office. Those titles give them benefits, and my team here in Paris, those who are in Paris, are supporting that population in Paris from a financial, administrative, and support perspective, and then all of this has meaning if people, the general public, knows why we do it, which is why we have a very strong remembrance policy. Actually, the office is the memory operator for the Ministry of Defense in France. So it's very important to understand that. That's how we work with ACHAC and other partners into developing programs to discuss, talk, to study the memory, the remembrance of those soldiers who came before. And of course, soldiers who came from former French colonies are a very important part of our work. We try to work on all the memories, but actually, and I say memories with an S, plural, because part of the idea is to deal with that as a whole, where everyone has a right to give his own story, his own memory, which is very important. I come back to that in a little while. So the office exists. There is a service in every big city in France, and as a whole in every district of France, which gives us about 100 offices in France, plus 2 offices in Northern Africa. See, we are still in the heritage of the history of the French armed forces, and the participation of so many Algerians to our conflicts is still materialized today by the presence of 2 veterans offices of the French government in Northern Africa, one in Morocco and one in Algeria, to support veterans of French armed forces who still live there, and they have rights that we try to support with them. And as I was saying earlier, it is very important to make the public aware of that, to have the support of the public, and to work with schools and to work with scholars. So we support as much as possible different sorts of programs with schools, with universities, and with organizations like ACHAC to make sure that the memory of those soldiers is available to the general public and discussed with the general public. It's very important. And it's all the more important because in the recent years, we have found that the international situation has given, some trends were born from difficult times, and we are in difficult times, where sometimes you will hear people claiming that France and the United States, for instance, are both racist countries, and it is seen through their history, which is the same thing. And well, from an historical perspective, you cannot compare the 2 countries, especially when it comes to the military and their forces. You cannot compare a French colonial soldier from World War I with an African American soldier in World War I as well, because their stories are different. Their presence on the battlefield comes from a different history. So all of this needs to be explained, because if we start to mix everything, then the ideas that people are developing about those particular periods are so wrong that they cannot help with the debate today. And this is very important to keep a clear idea of the historical perspective by giving a voice to everyone, and by trying to avoid to mix up things and to make them as clear as possible, given the fact that history and memory are 2 different things, and that commemorating is a 3rd thing. So I will start with this. History is a science. We try to develop a methodology. We study archives. We study facts that we tend to believe are true. And memory is part of it, because it's the testimony of those who were there. But as we all know, memory is human. It is subject to inaccuracies or the weight of time. And sometimes remembering is not an exact science. This is where we use historical methodology that we apply to the testimonies, so we can use them in historical content. Now, all of this is important to commemorate, meaning to honor, to remember the sacrifices, the participation of those soldiers to our wars in the past. And when you do that, we do that because when we commemorate, we know that what was done in the past has a meaning today. This is really where we try to make a difference. We commemorate things because they have a meaning today. Sunday, the 27th of April, in France, was a national day of remembrance for the victims of deportation. And the Ministry of Veterans Affairs and Remembrance made a vibrant speech about how, especially in today's context, commemorating those particular events and those who died in concentration camps, deportation camps, had a meaning, and why we should look at those who fought the Nazis and all, the message that we got from the past until today. And there were youth at the ceremonies on Sunday, and this is very important to transmit them all the meaning of those commemorations, which is just not talking about the past. It's talking about what is important that we can learn from the past to have a better today and a brighter tomorrow. This is very important that we project ourselves in that perspective. So when we go back to World War I and the French colonial troops, the problem we had a couple of years ago, and we were in a context where the relationship, I'm talking about 1916, 17, 18, I'm sorry, 2000, 17, 18, 19, 2000. We were in a context where there was a lot of political debate, sometimes not so not so reasonable, about racism, systemic racism, about racism in France, United States, and of course the issue of colonial troops in France was at stake, and many people would be in the news and talking about how France has a racist heritage, and I'm not going to claim today that France was not a racist nation in the way it managed its colonies, but it's also something that must be considered with extreme subtlety. What I mean, historians don't judge history, and memory should not be when it's used to teach and to commemorate. It's should be used as a very specific tool to learn from each others, to learn to live together, and not to divide. And this is really where we stand. And it is very important to understand that in World War One, you will hear many things about how the French would send African soldiers on the battlefield. Well, to tell you the truth, it's a very complex issue. And things went very fast from the turn of the century to World War One. Actually, if you look at the way the colonies were seen by the French prior to World War One, the image of the people who lived in the colonies was very negative. There was a strong feeling of superiority, which was backed up by fake science. I mean, at the time, it was until World War II. It's very common to hear scientists defending the idea that races are different. Winston Churchill was believed that they were different in races, but that the superior races should protect the inferior races, just like Jules Ferry would say in a famous speech in Paris. So it's difficult to judge with today's vision and knowledge uh, what was believed at the time. But the truth is, it was not a very nice view to look at some things that happened, especially if you've heard about the human zoos, for instance, where colonial populations were shown to the public in France in zoos, human zoos. There's no other word for that. They would be represented in their more or less recreated environment for the public. And for instance, at the Universal Exhibition of 1886, there was a whole section of the exhibition which was dedicated to showing French colonial populations. And of course, the image was that they were closer to being animals than being human beings. And it was very negative, and the white populations who visit those human zoos would get the feeling that they were far superior to these people. So as a whole, it was not very glorious at the time. World War One is going to bring a new image to the colonies, and it's important to understand that the first, I mean, in World War One, the French mobilized more than 8 million soldiers in France, and the war was believed at first to be a short affair that would be fast to win and not last long. And it proved very, very soon that it would last much longer than expected, and with a lot of soldiers killed. The average rate in the battlefield in World War I was that we lost about, almost 1,000 soldiers a day during 4 years. So the feeling was that we needed all the help that we could have. And Mangin, French officers, decided to go further with the black troops, with the colonial troops. And he had a project which was validated, but approved by the Ministry of Defense, the War Ministry, excuse me, to bring more colonial troops on battlefield. We had colonial troops prior to World War I, but with World War I, we developed recruitment. And this is one of the issues that we, the French, need to look at. Just like the British need to look at their own recruitment of Indian forces, for instance. And I had this discussion recently with colleagues in London. So for the French, the situation was far more complex than just what you see in some films that came out recently. There were some forced abduction in the French forces, absolutely. But if you look at it, the French would arrive in a place, and in many African areas, the status of the status of an African man would also be part of his status of his place in the village or in his community would also be depending on his status as a warrior. And when you confiscate the weapon of a warrior in some cultures in Africa, you take his virility, you make him less than a man. And when in World War I, the French offered to some of these African men to join the French forces, the colonial troops, it was a way for them to regain their place in their communities. So it's one example of the complexity of recruiting in Africa. Others were conscripted, others were taken by force, others joined because they wanted to. So it's very difficult, and historians have difficulties to quantify the numbers, between those who were forced to join, those who joined voluntarily, and because of the complexity of the situation I explained. So as a whole, we sent in France 600,000 colonial troops. And another thing you hear a lot is that they were meat sent to the grinder. Actually, on the battlefield, if you compare the rate of losses in combat, colonial troops lost about 16% of their numbers on the battlefield, while French metropolitan troops lost little more than 17%. So it's more or less the same number of people died in combat. So bullets made no difference, and we didn't send more, expose more the soldiers if you look at how many of them died in combat. So it was not meat for the grinder. But on the other hand, it was a great moral boost for the French, just like also the arrival of the Americans at the end of 1917. France was really bleeding. There were so many casualties that the arrival of colonial troops and then the arrival of other troops from America was a relief and a moral booster. Going back to what I first said about the image of colonial populations prior to World War I, there was a big change in World War I during the war because of the vision the French had of the colonial troops. They were considered to be strong, valiant, gallant, and all those qualities were important because they were awarded to people who 20, 30 years before would be considered very inferior. So it's interesting to see how the status of soldiers came with a new vision for those colonial populations. If I make a comparison with the US at the time, it's completely different. In the US, African American troops were not favored at the beginning when they were the big conscriptions of 1916, because there's always some reluctance on the side of the Americans to give weapons to African Americans because they were part of their communities. And there's always this feeling that if you arm those who are citizens at the second level, they might revolt someday. And if they know how to use weapons, you might be in trouble. And American history shows that in the past, it happened in certain dimensions. So there is this idea that um, you should not arm people who might be dangerous in your backyard. And because African American populations were living in the US versus the French colonial populations which were living in Africa, there is not the same considerations on who they are and who they represent. In America, very soon, the burden of war um, becomes something that for many of the guys, the people, I'm sorry, involved in the selection committees for the armed forces, envision as something that should be shared by the African American population as well. So the American will mobilize 4 million troops to send overseas, and out of that, um, 350,000 African Americans, and only about 45,000 of them will be sent to France. And the difference of treatment is amazing. French colonial troops, French black soldiers, when they arrive in France, they are cheered by the population, and they are invited by families. They fight alongside white troops. They experience something that is really brotherhood in arms. There is no question about it. I mean, there is a lot of friendship. The French see them as a relief. They're exotic. They're new. They bring a lot of exoticism into France. So their connection to the French population is great. At the same time, when the Americans arrived in France, they recreate the segregation that exists in the US in the French US bases. In the port of Saint-Nazaire, for instance, you have quarters for white soldiers, quarters for black soldiers. You have a movie on base where the seats at the backs are reserved for black soldiers and so on. So, and what is really going to be a nightmare for the American headquarters is to see that French women, white French women, have no problem going out with American black soldiers, to the extent where the staff of Pershing will ask the French not to allow a journal to be published where the front page shows a white woman, French woman, and a black American soldier. So the experience of the French within the French and American armed forces for black soldiers is completely different. They're not the same black soldiers. Colonial troops should not be compared with African Americans for many reasons, especially the fact that the African Americans were living in the US and they were American citizens, even if they had less rights, while colonial troops were coming to France. And one point about this, the French colonial troops also, some of them enlisted because they were told that they would gain rights with their participation in the war, which is exactly the same motivation you will find for many black leaders in the US who encourage black soldiers to volunteer because they consider that by shedding blood on the battlefield, they would gain the rights to be better citizens, I mean, to be full citizens in their country. As we know, after World War I, in both countries, it was not very much realized. But it was important to say that at least the treatment of the troops was not the same. You will hear things about um, equipments being not the same or food being of less quality. All of this is not historically is not in the archives. This is not, and on the contrary, you will find that the French would take great care of their colonial troops in France by issuing particular equipment like winter garments because they were afraid they would be cold in the winter and things like that. So once again, we need to look at the what people would believe versus what happened and try to transmit, I mean, try to do the remembrance work with this. One problem we have is that memory is attached to the narrative of those who were there. And for World War One, they're all gone. So now it's the narrative of those who will talk about what they heard from them, or or from the narratives that were written by those when they were alive. So it's a different situation now. World War II is, we are about to lose most of our, I mean, the second generation of combatants, I would say, in France is about to disappear. And now we're working a lot with testimonies of those who were great witnesses of the war in Algeria. And the next generation for us will be those who were involved in foreign operations after 1960, 63, 64. I've talked about, I see that time is running, so I will not, not emphasize too much World War One or go too much in details in the use of troops, troops there. But it's important to understand that we try to work on the remembrance projects to give a voice to every memory, every soldiers, and every communities who were involved in our wars. And to do that, like I said, we now the generation of World War One is gone. The generation of World War II is disappearing, and we're trying a lot to present witnesses to classes, for instance, to classes in the French education system, and we've developed exhibitions to accompany our policy to support. Remembrance projects, and we do what we call the shared memories, plural, shared memories. And when we go to a school with a team of witnesses, we try to have a former Algerian combatant, a former French draftee, sometimes a former French career soldier, a former member of a French family colonist who lived in Algeria and who had to leave the country at the end of the war. And we tried, sometimes we also have French Algerian soldiers who fought with the French. And all these people are at the same table. They all tell their history respectfully, and they shared the differences in their histories. And by accepting the fact that we can agree to disagree, we give a general idea of something that is close to the truth to those who are the listeners. And this is really what the office has tried to do for the Ministry of Defense in France in the last 10, 15 years, so that all the memories are represented, and that every community can find their voice in what is transmitted to the younger generation. It is very important because one of the questions I was asked is, why is the remembrance of minorities, the colonial troops, and so on, is not as spread within the French narrative? Actually, it is more and more. For instance, the very public acceptance of Josephine Baker at the Pantheon recently, or the acceptance of Misak Manouchian as well, who was not even French at the time he was killed. He was refused French nationality. He was a resistant from Armenia, who was in France and who fought in a movement. And there is a focus in the recent years on all the contributions from all types of populations that were not quoted as much in the past. So there is a real effort to do that. And it's important because a lot of our children today are the inheritors of those soldiers. And probably one issue we have is that people are not connected too much, enough at least, with the history of their families. And sometimes it helps to build your identity when you know more about why you are in France, why you are French, and where it comes from. And many of those children from diversity, like we say in France, they would benefit from getting a better knowledge in school of who they are if the programs that we support have a better reach. And the good thing is we have an excellent relationship with the Board of Education. It's just that the programs are dense, and it's difficult sometimes to bring those themes in schools. So I was talking about World War One and the meat grinder myth, all these things. It's besides that, it's just important to remind younger generations that if they are in France today, it's because maybe a grandfather or granduncle fought for France and decided that they wanted to stay in France, or they came from another generation, but an older generation within their family was also part of the French armed forces. And because of that, they are as French as any other French citizen. And their roots deserve to be known and to be explained. We did with ACHAC particular projects in which we addressed young students from areas which were not so favored. And we found out that when we talk about those issues about identity, they are very interested because it tells them things that they're not used to hear about themselves. So by spreading those histories, the history and the stories and the memory of those colonial soldiers, we actually help France to be less divided and to build a better society for us today. So it is very important to carry on with the mission, which is to work on the remembrance. Do you have more time to talk, or?
No, we can. We should go with the question of the public.
Okay.
Thank you, André, for your analysis. So we have some questions in the chat. You can write them if you want. So there is one question from Stephanie. Thank you for the comparison with African Americans. Do you have similar comparison with the South American, and English-speaking Caribbean colonial concepts of brother in arms?
So we're talking about those who served with the British?
I guess.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is not my field of work. And I've worked on British colonial troops, but in a much further period of time in the American Revolution. So I am not the right person to discuss British colonial troops. I was part of a symposium a couple of weeks ago in London where the subject was discussed, and what I've discovered is that they have the same issues to talk regarding recruitment and then the use in combat of the soldiers. So it's a very interesting topic, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to discuss it, unfortunately.
Okay. I have one question. So I was thinking about the massacre of Traoré, and so there's been some discrimination in the army regarding this history fact. And does it still exist, discrimination in the army in France, or no?
It's a very good question. There's a paradox, an amazing paradox. The military is the most conservative establishment of all, and when it comes to relations between communities and minorities, is the most advanced of all. In the United States, the first break in the wall of civil rights comes in 1948 when President Truman ended the segregation in the armed forces. If you think of it, the next will come. The next big steps will come 10, 20, 30 years later. In France, I would say you should look at in two different directions. First, colonial troops did not remain colonial troops. What happened to those who served in the French colonial troops? First, during their time in the colonial troops, and I will talk about terror and discrimination, but most of them were treated with, with equality compared to white troops. You will hear things about equipment, like I talked about World War One, equipment, food. This is not real. When it came to how they were equipped, trained, how they were, training is important because in other countries you will see that training was considered dangerous. They would not hesitate to send minority troops to combat without training because of that. Put that aside. The training, the equipment, the conditions, everything was comparable to the white to those of the white troops. Now things came like in Tiaroy because pay was late to come. Tiaroy, and I'm not. It's a complex thing because There's a lot of debate about Tiaroy right now. Tiaroy is the exact example of when people are mistreated, and those were repatriated from camps where they have spent the war, and they wanted to get their pay, and they were told to go back to their places without being paid to start with. So it generated a mutiny, and which the French government recognized in the voice of François Hollande a couple years ago in Senegal, that it was very wrong, and that we had to face the fact, and we do face the fact. It was a massacre, and because those were not armed people, and they were killed by French troops. And recently, the Office of Veterans in France, my organization, awarded the title Fallen for France to 6 of those who were killed in Tiaroy. So it's a move toward reconciliation in that perspective. It can be debated, but it's a fact. So I'll go back to what I was saying previously. You look at what happened at the time, colonial troops, and then what happened when they left the troops. And we don't talk much about this, but many of the administrative infrastructure in Africa gathered veterans of the French armed forces. As a matter of fact, you would go in a village in Africa and you would see that those in charge were the former colonial soldiers, because they had learned things, they had come back with a status, and it would, I mean, the colonial troops had a deep impact on the organization of communities in Africa long after the wars were gone. So it's another thing to look at, and there are many different themes that need to be worked on when it comes to what those soldiers got from being in the troops, colonial troops, or serving in the armed forces. Now, discrimination then and today, no. You have, if you look at today's French armed forces, I have served myself in the military branch of the French armed forces, and I have always seen a lot of people coming from different minorities and being able to access ranks and being officers and general officers and so on. So I was talking yesterday with a French colonel who's from Algerian background, who come from the outskirts of Paris, and he was telling me that it was a perfect example of what the military can offer to someone who was not born in the right place of the suburbs. So once again, I was saying that the military establishment is very conservative, maybe the most conservative of all, but it's also the most advanced of all when it comes to the advancement of minorities. And throughout history, it's something that can be verified, and it is the truth. I'm not saying that the army did not segregate it at some point, or did unfair things, and it did. But overall, it's been a tool for integration, and that's why my research have shown me.
Okay, and you spoke a lot about colonial troops, but maybe you can have some word about the soldiers from overseas French territories.
Of course, it's when you talk about Caribbeans or Indian Ocean, and those territories were very particular in the sense that they wanted the same rights, and part of their claims was that they wanted to be submitted to the same draft as people in France, I mean metropolitan France, and so the first contingent sent from World War I to France was a draft contingent. And to them, it was the answer to something they requested. They wanted to have the same right to fight as the others and being considered as the same citizens as the others in doing so. So it was very interesting to look at that when I look at the way they were sent to France in World War One. So it's something that really amazed me, that and it's very comparable to what I've studied on the American side. African Americans always fighting in every American war to say we have the rights to fight and we will become full citizens if we do so. There is the idea that if you give your blood, you're worth being a citizen and you're worth being the equal of the others. And this is true for the Caribbeans. I mean, they really wanted the same rights, and it went through the particular right of being selected as the others. World War II, mostly volunteers. We have battalion. Um, they were 500 to start with, sent to Fort Dix in the U.S., where they became, with new volunteers, almost 2,000, who deployed then with the French, the Free French, they deployed to Italy and other battlefields. It's a very interesting story as well because of their stay in the U.S. and then going to the battlefield from, I would say, the course of their training and the way they were taken to be part of the Free French was very interesting. And it is not the most known of all the memories. And I think that we need to do more about those overseas territories and the contribution they made, especially because many of them were among the first to say no to the Vichy regime and to fight the Vichy regime, especially because some of those who were governors in those areas were not, the French authorities were not very prone to join with de Gaulle. And those French citizens, colonial citizens who didn't share all the rights of the white citizen, nonetheless, they were some of the first to say, we need to say no and enter into resistance.
Okay, thank you. Maybe another question. Within the history of historical misrepresentation of Black population, are there any words and phrases that have evolved over the terms of giving respect to the colonial troops? Can you speak on this from an historical perspective?
Very, very simply, historians will work on the daily reports. The daily reports are, in French, journaux de marche et d'opération, operations daily reports. It is where the officers will write the day-to-day battlefield situation. And there are some difficulties to start with in World War I, with the use of colonial troops for different reasons, which are very, very fastly corrected. And from what I've read in the daily reports, the appreciation of French white senior officers for African colonial troops or colonial troops in general is just very appreciative in the sense that they are praised for being courageous, for being smart in combat, for being, it's when I was talking about the human zoos and how they gave a very negative image of colonial populations. World War I is really a cornerstone for that, where suddenly it is not that at all. I'll take one example. I will not quote the brand, but a particular chocolate powder brand uses a Senegalese soldier, and it's been very much criticized. If you look at it, the advertisement was, he likes it, so you may want to have it too, because he's a great guy. He's strong, he's courageous, he's gallant, and he's having that particular brand of chocolate. So you should have it too. Meaning that the French children should identify to the Senegalese soldier because he's a model. And this is the image and the vocabulary that went with it that you find in the French reports. Courage, gallantry, someone we are proud to fight alongside with, and so on. And this pride, you will find it in the advertisement for chocolate. If you compare to another brand, and I will not quote the brand as much either, but an American brand for a particular rice given by a particular uncle, people they don't complain much about that brand in France. But if you look at the package, it's uncle is not an uncle of anyone. It was the name given to older black servants in American mansions in the South. He's bringing the rice on the package to the living room where the white family actually is having lunch, and he will go back through the kitchen door. So people had troubles with the representation of a Senegalese soldier on the chocolate brand in France, but did not complain much about this other brand for the Uncle's Rice. I think it's worth taking a better look at that, because the image of the black soldiers from World War One on was very positive in the vocabulary you will find in the reports. Now, there is one particular thing I may want to talk about. Um, we trusted our troops, and we really had a sense of brotherhood in the French armed forces. And once again, there are some bad sides, dark sides to relationship within the French command and control troops and so on. And terror is one of them. And I'm not downsizing anything that may have happened or anything like that. But what I'm saying is, um, the for instance, the fact that during the Ruhr occupation, we used Senegalese troops, colonial troops, in Germany in 1923, which was very much criticized by the Germans, of course, as being unethical, as being against the white race, and blah, blah, blah. Also was criticized by the Americans and the British, and that it nourished a particular form of racism from the Germans against our colonial troops, and that in 1940, the massacres of Chasselet and others, which were perpetrated not by SS soldiers, but the regular Wehrmacht, was fueled by the remembrance of having colonial troops in the Ruhr in 23, 20, 24, 25. And at the time of those massacres, a lot of white soldiers tried to protect their black brothers in arms and were killed alongside them. There are many examples of that. And the Tata in Chasselet, it's very important to say that, was created by the local director of the office which I represent today, the Office of Veterans, who was so disgusted by the massacre committed by the Germans that he decided to create an African cemetery dedicated to the soldiers, where they could be sent to rest. So all those things are not very much known, but they are part of the history, and they are part of the common memories today with many of the African nations.